Once described as a community in full flower, the present-day North End has been labeled Canada's quintessential landscape of despair. Driving through the North End today, it is hard to ignore the growing number of houses and businesses being boarded up, abandoned, torched, and torn down. Many Winnipeggers associate the North End with street gangs, crime, prostitution, arson, and poverty. Much of what Winnipeggers know about the North End and our inner city comes from the headlines of the daily newspapers. But what happens when we look beyond the headlines, to the history that has shaped the community and to the individual stories that have been impacted by these forces? To fully appreciate the present challenges facing the North End, it is important for us to try and understand the larger context. Too often, the voices of history and the community itself have gone unheard. Laid out on a grid plan in the early 1870s, the North End remained mostly vacant until 1881, when the Canadian Pacifica Railway Company announced that its main transcontinental line would pass through Winnipeg. Major shops, yards, and a passenger station were built, attracting wholesale and manufacturing firms to the land around the CPR yards. Population growth and land booms rapidly redefined the social geography of the city. And when immigrants arrived, seeking the cheapest land available, many settled in the North End. The amount of immigration in Winnipeg was unprecedented in Canada, and the population shot from 42,000 in 1901 to 150,000 in 1913. Described as an open sore cutting the city in half, spewing noise, dust, and pollution into the neighboring communities, the CPR yards literally cut off the new immigrants from the rest of the city. Many remember the North End as a vibrant and thriving multi-ethnic community. Though poor, people had jobs, and the neighborhood was home to the working class that fueled the city's great economic boom of the early 20th century. Because of its isolation, the North End came to regard itself as a self-contained alternative to the rest of the city. Despite the rich and vibrant culture created by the largely Eastern European and Jewish workers of the North End, they were discriminated against and referred to despairingly as hunkies, bohunks, Polacks, and more. In an attempt to maintain control and keep the new immigrant community politically powerless, the city's wealthy elite passed legislation stating that one needed to own a certain amount of frontage property in order to vote in the civic elections. Then they intentionally divided up the land in the North End in long and narrow lots that fell just short of the minimum requirements, in effect prohibiting people from having a political voice and a say in their future. Driving down Selkirk Avenue today, it is difficult to imagine what it must have been like 60 or even 30 years ago. From the turn of the century to the 60s, the 8 or 10 blocks from Main Street to Arlington were a bustling marketplace. There were 3 main theaters on Selkirk Avenue alone. Shoppers gravitated towards the many small stores catering to all the needs of the many ethnic groups in the North End. Located on Selkirk Avenue were confectionaries, dentists, optometrists, druggists and doctors, butcher and grocery shops, books and record stores, banks, real estate and loan offices, delicatessens, and barber shops. If the corner of Portage and Main was the axis of Winnipeg, so Selkirk Avenue became the hub of the North End. As the North End evolved, some of its residents gained a firmer foothold on the economic ladder and began moving away from the crowded heart of the North End. As some groups began to move out, others, most importantly the Aboriginal population, have moved in. Many arrive ill-prepared for urban life and without the skills and social supports to access adequate employment. Poverty in the inner city is characterized by powerlessness, hopelessness, dependence, and social isolation. In a society where the suburb is the norm, the inner city is now even more isolated. One result of this growing concentration of poverty and increasing social isolation is that families have to cope not only with their own poverty, but also with the social isolation and economic deprivation of the hundreds, if not thousands of other families who live near them. While a well-known slogan of the North End is people before profit, the reality is that for far too long, this has simply not been the experience of most people living in the community. Since the early 1990s, while earning record profits, all of the major banks in Canada have been closing down branches in low-income communities and deserting more and more Canadians. Today, there are no banks left in the heart of the North End. Former bank buildings are scattered throughout the North End, leaving most neighborhood residents with check cashing services, payday loan companies, and pawn shops as their only banking alternatives. Redlining, where insurers and lenders literally draw a red line around a lower-income neighborhood, continuing to take deposit dollars out of the community, but making a conscious decision not to loan to businesses or individuals in that area because of the perceived high risk and low return, was a reality in the North End during the 1990s. When a neighborhood has been redlined, people cannot get a mortgage to buy a home. You cannot take out a loan to open a business. Housing prices continue to drop because most people can't afford to buy a house without a mortgage. The real estate market in the North End went bust. Houses were selling for less than $9,000. Slum landlords, uninterested in maintenance and repairs, could then come in and buy up dozens of houses at a time. Almost 70% of North End residents live in rental housing. Inadequate housing has always been a problem in the North End. Much of the original housing stock is deteriorating, the result of small, cheaply built houses on cramped lots constructed by developers looking for quick profits. By the late 1990s, 75% of all vacant houses in Winnipeg were concentrated within a 20-square block area in the heart of the North End. A target for slum landlords, many of whom do not live in the North End or even in Winnipeg.
The slum landlords I seem to run into are the ones that want to rent their houses in the North End. I was in this house on Burroughs and Salter, and all they seemed to be after was the rent. Oh yeah, on the third floor, I fell through the stairs because the stairs were so weak. And lucky I grabbed onto the railing, because if I didn't grab onto the railing, I would have went straight to the basement. That's how weak the boards were.
These sights scar the streets, leaving the impression that perhaps this area really has been forgotten by the rest of the city. This perception contributes to a tangible sense of isolation in the North End. Too often the media characterizes youth either by demonizing them as monsters, thugs, and terrorists, or by putting them on a pedestal, focusing on the one who beat the odds. The youth themselves rarely have an opportunity to share their stories. For young men with limited educations, criminal records, and lacking the skills or networks to find employment with a living wage, many see the drug trade as their only reasonable option.
There was a while ago where I hit like a really desperate time in my life. It's like I was going around job searching. I was still in high school, and they don't know my family and stuff, but I know they needed help, and I was still in school. I wasn't making no money. I was just going to school, doing my thing. So I dropped out of high school and got a job. Just wasn't making enough money quick enough. So I talked to some friends, and they hooked me up with somebody, and that's when I started selling drugs, and I guess you could say become a hustler and stuff. And
in a day you can make anywhere from just over, I know it depends how long you go for, a couple hours you make an easy couple hundred. Just go a whole day you'd make about 1,500.
So when you look at getting a job at McDonald's and doing this,
it's a lot different.
The math is kind of different.
It's a lot different.
The way in which drugs are sold in Winnipeg has changed considerably over the past few years. It used to be that you had to drive to certain drug spots, such as outside the Merchants Hotel or Central Park. Young gang members and drug dealers would be waiting there to run to your window and sell you whatever you wanted. Nowadays, most drug dealing in Winnipeg is done via dial-a-dealers. Not unlike ordering pizza, you literally call a cell phone and a delivery vehicle comes right to your house.
It's completely different. Just people in a ride, drop. It's like a delivery service, you know? Like if you call pizza, they come see you. It's like that. It's simple. You just you get it, bring back a certain amount, and then the rest is yours.
Like within 1 week, you could make like at least $5,000-$6,000 easily. Like if you wanted to go at it hard, you can make that in like 3 days.
This makes it more difficult for the police to track. Cell phones and delivery vehicles are constantly being circulated and replaced. This is not a neighborhood that has given up hope. Instead, recent stories and signs of hope need to be celebrated. Nonprofits such as the North End Housing Project have been established to acquire and rehabilitate rundown homes and to build brand new infill housing on vacant lots. Other organizations such as Habitat for Humanity and Lazarus Housing have been doing the same, slowly working to improve the housing stock in Winnipeg's inner city and making home ownership affordable for low-income families. Dozens of social services, ministries, and community development organizations are located throughout the North End, committed to serving and empowering the community. While some argue that the sheer number of not-for-profits is creating an imbalance, community stakeholders are working hard to attract businesses back to the once thriving corridor. Then there is Point Douglas, a North End neighborhood where community residents rallied together, gaining a renewed sense of ownership and shutting down some 30 crack houses in 2007. In order to build a strong, vibrant community in the North End, the residents of that community need to be involved in the decision-making that impacts their lives. Their goals, hopes, and dreams need to be valued and listened to. Who will listen?
You guys helped me out a lot, because like I can honestly say if it hasn't been for inner city, probably wouldn't be here, you know. I have the deepest regrets from actually doing that stuff, from actually wanting to make that money to help, because like I hurt so many people. It's crazy, and like I don't have many regrets or anything, but that is probably the number one regret that I have so far in my life. Inner city helps so many kids, like through their chopper club, through all their like other stuff, and like it just shows like how much of an impact it has and how much fun they could like let kids have who like don't really get to have much fun that too often, you know. I always want to know what my purpose is being here, and like inner city helped me a lot to actually find out where I'm trying to head out in life and everything like that, and they help me spiritually and stuff, and like find out like some of the reasons why things have been going on the way they have, and just cleared it up a bit, you know, instead of it just being a big blur, and like so I wouldn't keep going the way I was, and yeah, and it's just I guess they're just good like that, for real.